to present Julie Hynes, who's the Executive Director of the Oregon Council on Problem Gambling. She's focused her work in the problem gambling field since 2002, with roles as the Director of Responsible Gambling with the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling, being the coordinator of the Prevention Lanes Problem Gambling Prevention Program, and an instructor at the University of Oregon. Also, as a co-investigator of the 2006 Problem Gambling Services Survey in the U.S. and providing training and technical assistance consultation since 2012. She was honored with the NCPG Wolfing Prevention Award, and she's currently the NCPG. She's on the board of directors, and she's a SOAR certified prevention specialist, of course. Again, Julie, we're always happy and I love listening to you talk, especially with prevention. So we're happy to have you today, and it's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robbie. It's always good to see your face and hear your voice.
Thank you.
And it is such a delight to be able to be here on a Monday morning. So to that end, thanks everyone for being here, for spending your Monday with us. Hopefully it'll be a quick hour for you. Really appreciate your participation at webinars, especially if you're feeling burned out on them, as many of us are these days in the COVID world. So yeah, as Robbie said, I've been spending most of my career on, or at least not most of my career. I used to be a registered dietitian, and I've been spending most of my last 18 years in this area of problem gambling. I think it's fascinating. The world is changing very quickly. The world of responsible gambling and gaming is changing very quickly. And I'd hope to be able to share stuff with you today, and also know that you have a wonderful programming with the North Carolina Problem Gambling Program services. And so you've got great stuff to lean to in North Carolina. So really quickly, what we'd like to do today is to share with you just some trends in gambling that have really accelerated the relevance and the need for responsible gambling, defining responsible gambling as it relates to these trends, and then finally, hopefully bringing some stuff home for you to be able to use in your practices. Now, I recognize that probably most folks here are clinicians, and so some of these things are like, well, you know, how do we do a policy? But it's important for us to be aware of as behavioral health providers, public health providers, and as people around what's happening with industry and what maybe the needs are to be able to address them. We also will be providing the slides following this presentation, so please do feel free to take a little bit of notes, but don't worry about being fast and furious. All of the notes, all of the links in this presentation are clickable, so when you do get that PDF copy of the slides, you'll be able to click directly to the research article, the news story, and the videos. So just keep that in mind. And do feel free to throw some questions or comments in the chat box. I kind of like to keep one eye open for that because I don't like to hear myself talk the whole time. So knowing that if you have engagement, if you have expertise to share, please do feel free to do that in the chat box. So let's get started. Why is responsible gambling needed more than ever? Well, there's a few kind of overarching themes that throughout this presentation we're kind of going to go into, and those themes are really critical, especially now in the world of COVID and as more things become digitized. We need responsible gambling more than ever. One key piece of this is the speed and the availability, the churn of a game, so to speak. So in other words, when you sit down to play a slot machine, the manufacturers, the operators want to figure out a way to keep you there, and they want to keep it quick, because the more quickly that game churns, the more money that they're going to get from us. We also know availability is key right now. We have all of these devices, it's no secret, in our hands, and many people are able to gamble on their own devices, and even moving more and more towards that way is iLottery, as well as casino gaming using tablets and those kind of things as well. So those are around the corner. Some states have already legalized those kind of things, and it'll be around the corner probably for sure in North Carolina. The other piece around it is because things are digital now, we're seeing more of that dopamine release. The manufacturers, operators know that they can get that hit off of us with near misses, with intermittent rewards. So the mechanisms in the brain are very similar to that, as probably no secrets to folks who are already aware of this. The mechanisms in the brain are similar to that of a high from, say, cocaine. And so these things are really important for us to keep in mind as well when we look at the responsible gambling practices and needs for that. Escape and dissociation, particularly right now because of COVID, we're exhibiting this traumatic experience altogether, and many people are finding ways to cope in different ways. So obviously many of us have seen the rates of alcohol use have gone up during the pandemic, but we also know that the rates of video game usage are going way, way up during the pandemic. And then there's an area of convergence with gaming and gambling where we'll see, as you know, as we go forward here, the convergence that really is probably an area of a catalyst for digital forms of gambling, and that escape and dissociation people feel the need to be able to cope. The other area is cashless. So that sense of money is sort of disappearing. There's all kinds of research on this, that people will use cashless debit cards more readily than they will use their own cash. I think many of us have seen that, experienced how easy it is for us to spend a little bit of money on our phone now. We just click a couple of buttons and we've already paid for something. And it's really even the intermediary methods of payments that aren't necessarily debit card related, but they're using debit cards to buy gems or some kind of intermediary piece that is sort of functioning as money through the game. And then anonymity and it's versus socialization. So there's a couple of key things here. One is protective, in that people are finding themselves to be able to socialize, especially during the pandemic, even if they're gambling together on an online casino, for example. That is helpful for them, and yet at the same time, there's also this isolation that we're all experiencing. And then, as we know, the addiction is isolating. It's the opposite of connection. And so when we think about these things, it's important for us to recognize that there are some factors here to come into play when we look at anonymity and the ability for someone just to kind of be able to spend as much as they want without sort of having other people check in on them and know how much they're playing. And then FOMO, fear of missing out. So knowing that other people are doing it and they can't. And then there's the rewards and enticements that of course casinos have been using for many years, and player rewards, giving you a bonus of extra cash, for example, and then finding ways to get people to keep playing. I do want to let you know, because Jamesia had pointed out here, that the slides will be shared in the course page where you can access your certificate, and you'll be notified by email when that information's ready for you. So just want to let y'all know that as well. And then there's the speed. Okay, so how does this look in practicality? So one is in, coming to a state near you in North Carolina, you've got sports betting that's going to be on its way. It's still not there, but there's been the passing of legislation that would allow sports betting. And then we think about things like in-game wagering. So it used to be where, you place a bet. It would be, the Panthers versus the Jaguars. You'd place a bet on that, and it would be straight up, and it'd be done. And now there's this in-game wagering. So the ability of that churn, the ability to keep playing, the ability to keep you enticed in the game. Oh, well, I just lost on that one. Maybe I can place another one and chase another one. And Leah Nauer from Rutgers Center for Gambling Studies says, when you're watching a game and can bet during that game, that plays into impulsivity, right? Because the more impulsive people are, the higher likelihood that they'll develop gambling problems. Impulsivity is a major risk factor for gambling disorder, as well as video gaming disorder. And so this is really critical for us when we think about even negative experiences during the pandemic, for example, and people who are feeling impulsive and that need to do something to escape. So that plays into that impulsivity piece around being able to wager consistently and often. And as we see here, this is a screenshot on the right-hand side. This is from the Oregon Lottery has sports betting, and this is the scoreboard app. And if you can see here, that's a really bad doodle. Ooh. That looks like a child's version of what Australia would look like. All right. So this is like an in-game betting. Yeah, you could place. So when I took the screenshot, it was the third quarter of a German basketball game. I have no idea who these teams are. Most people don't. There's not a whole lot of live sports betting aside from German basketball. There's soccer now that's coming online, Russian table tennis, Korean baseball, but there's not a whole lot. But still, they're offering the ability to be able to gamble and offering in-game wagering. And that's what keeps people engaged. All right, so how does this play then in terms of not just sports betting, but also just overall betting, and how the industry has really worked to entice people and to keep them playing? One key thing is that we've heard a lot of is that the operators will create games that are interesting to younger sets of people. So this game is arguably drawing people in to play Centipede. So that would be my generation, people who grew up in the 80s who loved to play Centipede. This game is arguably, trying to draw people of that demographic. That being said, this game is also, this is at Seattle Airport, this game is also a lottery game that is at a certain level of height for young people. And it says very small lettering here is must be 18 or older to purchase. Now, interestingly enough, with this kind of a thing, there's no Federal Trade Commission regulations on advertising and marketing of lottery games, of gambling. So what protects people with alcohol and tobacco regulation does not protect people when it comes to gambling. And this will be really important as we look forward at some of the practices that are done. So again, building the foundation. Why is this important? We see now that gambling takes its page from gaming. This is a game here that is NBA 2K. Pause real quick. Is the audio working?
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
You know what? It depends on, let me see. When we shared screen, when you shared screen, of course, you have to check that box. There we go.
You hear
it's
it?
working. Yeah, it's
Okay,
going.
good.
Yeah, cool.
No, yes! I'm not gonna look. I'm not gonna look. Yes!
So I think you get the idea there. This is NBA 2K20, a game that the Entertainment Software Rating Board has rated E for everyone. And you see a lot of the slot mechanics, the roulette kind of wheel, the things that are you're able to get prizes out of these. Now, interestingly enough, if you don't have enough in-game currency, you can place your real currency into the game to try to then get these benefits. So a lot of people call that pay to win, where people are actually spending their real money and trying to get something out of it that that normally would take a lot more time in a game without actual currency. So it is a concept. Gaming has taken its pages from gambling. There's a lot of stuff around this that we've seen from either research or just practice, that we see the gaming, video gaming marketing, video gaming development programming has taken pages from the gambling industry because they know it's effective to get money out of people. So that's an area where gaming takes its pages from gambling. Now, we're also seeing on the flip side is gambling taking its pages from gaming. This is the International Gaming Institute in University of Nevada, Las Vegas. They now have an esports course.
The Esports Lab is a class that's designed to somehow incorporate esports into casinos.
I would say the biggest challenge of trying to integrate esports into the casinos would be how to attract millennials and how to keep them inside a casino.
I think the biggest problem for integrating esports into the integrated resort is going to be really marketing and catering to the customer segment.
Esports has a unique requirement where we have to be able to build an experience that keeps their attention and draws them to that property.
It's not just playing video games, it's really learning about business.
I really enjoy how Robert would bring a lot of these experts in and tell us how it really is, how this industry works, and what it takes to succeed in this industry.
We get to hear directly from people that are in the front line of esports.
The classes are like an experience. You never know what you'll be doing one day.
Kind of unique in the fact that it's never been offered at any campuses before.
This course challenged me to think outside the box, and it's not only creating a LAN center, we want to implement more entertainment for the millennials to come and visit our venue.
So in their general concepts, this is when I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. right off the bat, what came to my mind was, okay, esports is competitive video gaming. What the industry knows is they're having an aging population. How do we get people into the casino anymore when they're not wanting to necessarily visit a brick and mortar casino, but they're trying to make it still this destination experience, right? So last year I was at a conference in which they actually had an esports discussion around creating games and enticing people to the casino. And one of the areas that they said was the most difficult way to incorporate video games in with their machines is speed. They're trying to figure out a way that they can get a video game incorporated into a slot machine kind of experience and have it quick enough where you could have many transactions at a quicker pace. So that was like the key hiccup in development of video games that can be applied for casino gaming. I thought it was fascinating to see, you know, they're trying to get this younger population and that they're still trying to figure out how to get their money in a more efficient way, so to speak. So how does this play into some of the apps that we're seeing? It's not technically gambling in terms of the legal rate. So where we like to talk about the legal definition of gambling is looking at prize, so at getting an element out of it, a reward, chance, so some kind of risk that's on the line, and then consideration, paying money or something of value in order to gain something. So those three elements would be considered legal forms of gambling. A lot of the areas that are really blurry right now are not considered legal forms of gambling, but they're really relevant to us in the responsible gambling world and as we look into the responsible gaming world, because the practices are very similar. So excuse me. So if we look at several of these games, these are the games that are the top rated in the Google Play Store in the US in March of this year. So on this number one is Coin Master. I'd love to see a show of hands for anybody that plays Coin Master. Anybody? You can raise your hand if you want to, and we'll see. Anybody familiar with Coin Master? Okay, I see a couple of yeses here. Yeah, so Coin Master is the number one leading grossing app in the United States as of March. And if you see there how much money it got in the month of March is $64 million. Candy Crush, most people are familiar with Candy Crush, gained $32 million. These games are not gambling games, right? But you look down here and there's Slotomania that's not gambling. It's not legal gambling, but it is transaction where you could put your real money in to gain virtual currency. So Slotomania gained almost $12 million in March. All right, so that's an obvious game, right? That's obviously related. It's a social casino game. But the interesting thing is that these games are not always obvious in the way that they manifest. A game like Coin Master, we'll see here, has a slot-based mechanism that is primary to the game. So you're trying to take over villages and raid and do all these other things and gain supplies, tools, currency in order to do that. And the way you have your turn is to play a slot machine. So this game is not at all a slot social casino game. It's not defined that in any sense of the imagination, but most games have some sort of gambling related feature included, whether it's a roulette thing like we saw in NBA 2K20, whether it's some other chance based kind of thing. So this game is all monetary. It's the way that you get supplies, the way that you can advance the game is by using your currency. So in order to get the currency, you spin the slot machine. Well, what happens if you're losing? Then you can pay real currency to gain virtual currency. And that's why that game made $64 million in March. Kyle says, things are coming full circle. Back in the day, there were LAN rooms, local access network rooms, where people would bring their computers to play the games together and make tournaments and such. Yeah, Kyle, I'm almost smelling the sweat and unwashed masses in Doritos right now, just reading that. So they faded a while back when internet gaming really took off, and now the casinos are trying to revive and monetize them, it seems. Absolutely. Yeah, you're really right. It's full circle. It really is full circle. You think about a few decades ago, just how those local access network rooms and people were playing, and it was so small, and now they're filling up arenas playing these games. So these simulated gambling games, if you look at the actual social casino games, not that one that we just looked at, that one's not considered a simulated gambling game. If you look at this research that shows simulated gambling games, however, like Slotomania, for example, the research shows that adolescents who played these games are more likely then to later move into real gambling, and then also more likely to have later gambling problems. Those preventionists in the room would be like, duh, we all know this to be grooming. We know it to be something where if you look at, say, candy cigarettes, mocktails, other things like that, it's sort of a grooming to get into the real thing. And so we're not surprised by this, but the research does articulate it to be true, even if Captain Obvious shows up and says, of course, this is the way. So what about esports? So esports has really been catalyzed by COVID. We're seeing now more of the competitive video gaming people betting on it. So for traditional sports like NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, these things are not really happening right now. We barely got golf going again. But esports, by nature, the ability to play in an environment in which you are not necessarily with a bunch of other people, it's easier to have social isolation. Now, the games themselves, the tournaments have slowed down. People have not been able to have, like, say, a League of Legends video game tournament, which you normally draws thousands and thousands of people to an arena. Those things are out. But there's still the ability to play esports tournaments given the nature of the pandemic. So what's interesting is, okay, well, esports, how many people actually bet on these video games? This data was prior to most states legalizing sports wagering. So we have 18 states now that have legalized sports wagering. This data is showing us that 11% of sports bettors nationwide have bet on esports. Again, prior to legalization of sports wagering, prior to the pandemic. And in North Carolina, you're just about that average at 10%. The pandemic, however, has really accelerated esports betting. There was an article last week in the New York Times that says, with real live games halted, betting world puts action on esports. So we're seeing a much, much higher rate. If you go to any one of the sites, if you go to, like, say, DraftKings Sportsbook, for example, or DraftKings even Fantasy Sports, you'll see a lot of video games that are offered as ability to wager or play fantasy sports on. So the way that these happen is through direct competition, online betting. There's also skins, which is a way to gamble within video games, and then loot boxes and other microtransactions. We're just going to go over this very quick because I think some people are already very familiar with loot boxes, but just in terms of looking at something, trying to get a prize out of a box, it's a mystery crate, trying to get a prize, trying to get a character, trying to get a weapon, trying to get something that will help them in the game. This is something that's offered with virtual currency in a game, but often people will play with real currency in the game. Paying for loot boxes is linked to problem gambling. There's a pretty clear link between paying for loot boxes and problem gambling. Most all loot boxes are they're in most games, like 6 out of 10 Apple and Android games have loot boxes within them. And these are suitable to people ages 12 and up. And rare loot box opening has been linked to the brain's response in triggering arousal and rewards and a greater urge to then open more loot boxes. So these data are important for us in the responsible gambling world because we see it as gambling. Now, skins are virtual items within games. Just really quickly, for those who are already familiar with skins, is these items are mostly decorative. They don't really help somebody play in a game, but they're mostly for street cred. They're mostly to look cool. There would be something like collecting sneakers. If you were to look at this in the tangible world, it would be like collecting sneakers. So people collect these, they're able to put their own skin on the line in the marketplace to try to get a better skin out of it. And oftentimes will be gambling on their skins. So again, these are things that are just unregulated. They're not considered gambling. And this is important for the prevention world to consider this, particularly when it comes to young people, as they are able to access their in-game currency and not be noticed by parents at all when they're using their Xbox money, their Roblox dollars, their V-Bucks from Fortnite, whatever it is, it doesn't show up on any transaction as gambling. All really relevant when we look at the gambling world. Now, among those who have bet on skins, among gamblers, they had much higher rates of problem gambling, 23% to 8%. So these are really risky games. This is a really risky type of an offering, and there's not a whole lot of regulation that's out there. All right, so let's take this now to the second step of things. What are some RG strategies now in this new world? Well, one of the things that we want to look at in the world of public health is we use Thomas Frieden's framework for public health action. It's called the health impact pyramid. It's basically kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs for public health practice. So the foundational piece in this would be socioeconomic factors. So housing, poverty, education, and equality. We're seeing a lot of housing, poverty, and inequality issues right now, and even education issues right now, really hitting the news. Obviously, the pandemic is part of it. Also, racial injustice is part of it. These areas are a little less, we certainly advocate, and we certainly try to practice as much as we can to help in these areas. But in terms of practicality in the public health world, because of problem gambling experts and a lot of say substance use disorder experts, this is a tough nut to crack. We see it as a very long-term systemic thing that obviously we want to help contribute to, but have a little influence over compared to some of these other areas. So when it comes to realistic areas for us in responsible gambling, we want to look at these other areas that are more up on the pyramid. So changing context, so policy change. Changing context is really key because it's sort of inoculating the entire population. We look at it as like fluoride. You fluoridate the water, people have healthier teeth. Dental health equals, in many cases, overall better health. So you want to think about baking things into the law before they come into existence. Now, it would have been nice if, say, North Carolina, like most states, don't have this. So it's not at all picking on North Carolina, but it would have been nice to say, okay, we're going to implement this. Here are all of the responsible gambling practices that we're going to have. Not to say that there aren't, because North Carolina, you are very well funded. You have a floor of funding, which is excellent to be able to provide those services. But in terms of future laws, we always want to look at baking something into the law, because we all know you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once there's legalization, it's very, very hard then to go back and ask for money. You want to do that at the very beginning. Then we look at long-lasting protective interventions. So point of sale tools, looking at things like making sure people need to be 21 or older to be able to gamble, and other safeguards. And then we look at interventions. So these would be like a prescription almost of public health in terms of problem gambling, retailer training, player education, harm reduction, exclusions, and those kind of things. And then many on this webinar fit into this counseling and education piece. And so the further up we go on this pyramid, the more individual it is and the more costly then these programming pieces become. But it all needs to work together. These things are all critical to work together. Those of us in the prevention fields are also very familiar with this continuum of care. Behavioral health providers are familiar with the continuum of care. So responsible gambling fits in on this in a variety of ways. Usually we're looking at the health promotion and harm reduction areas of this. And then we are also thinking about working with people in recovery, because if we're able to have people have successful policies, successful tools to be able to keep people healthy, to save people in recovery, to make sure that they're not receiving advertisements in the mail and inducements to go back to the casino. Things like that are really critical. So responsible gambling fits really most of the continuum of care. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but really responsible gambling was kind of placed in a foundation in the mid-2000s with what's called now the Reno model. And the Reno model really was to implement policies and practices designed to prevent and reduce potential harm. So prevention and harm reduction are underpinnings of this Reno model, and people have taken the Reno model and they've used it in the last many years. In terms of looking at this in a broad approach, how it's done, before we actually get into some of the practical pieces of this, is three things: awareness and education, policies and industry safeguards, and then harm reduction practices. So let's look at this. Now, one of the things that we know in our fields is that I will say personally, when responsible gambling efforts started as an industry base, I was really skeptical. I was like, you're only doing this for good PR. You want to maybe throw a few dollars at it, say you have this great program, when really it's just kind of smoke and mirrors. It's just sugarcoating the problem. And initially, in many ways, it kind of was. I think there's a lot of skepticism among the industry with public health providers and vice versa. And there wasn't a great relationship that was initially founded. However, over the last 10 or so years, and even more accelerating recently, is we're seeing far more programs that do implement responsible gambling, more verification of certification for operators, even on the ground level, say dealers in a casino that are learning more about RG, and then trainings, awareness, education. We're seeing an overall, the industry's more positive attitudes towards it. I think that they're saying that they're going to actually have better PR and better response overall in terms of their product if they're operating in a safe way, and that they show that they actually care about their customers. And then we're seeing more relationships with the problem gambling field. There's a lot more camaraderie than there was a few years ago. Now, this is how it looks in practicality. So we'll see, like in traditional forms of the gambling, we'll see things like TV and radio campaigns. You have that in North Carolina with the program that we'll look at in just a moment. Messaging on tickets, having the helpline number, things like that. Those are all kind of base level, pretty foundational pieces. More training, more research. Now, the area of research is interesting to me because we don't have a lot of the data from operators. They're really guarded about that data. They use their data to be able to then capture more of the market. How do we market towards specific players and specific populations? We're not seeing that data. We would like to see more of it. But there are things like in terms of our risk tracking surveys and your youth surveys, that at least we're finding more about behavior overall. So, and then there's mystery shopping, the way games are designed, and then voluntary self-exclusion. We're going to look at all of this. Incidentally, 18 lotteries out of 52 North American lotteries have been verified under the National Council on Problem Gambling North American State and Provincial Lotteries Responsible Gambling Verification Program. So there's still a lot to do, but at least 18 have now been certified under this program. It is a program that I should actually put the link to so that you all can check that out as well. All right, so near that bottom of that Frieden pyramid, that public health pyramid, is impact of policy, right? So here's how it's done in practice. Now, the American Gaming Association printed recently, a few months ago, Responsible Gaming Code of Conduct. You can check that out on the link that's down below. It's interesting because it looks like a lot of the concepts were based on the Massachusetts Gaming Commission Responsible Gambling Framework. But policy is really key. In Massachusetts, all of their 3 casinos, it was baked into law that they cannot have tobacco in the casino. So they're completely tobacco free. Now, how does this help? Well, one is people are breathing better air, but another key thing is a sidebar from it that's a really helpful tool is that it then encourages people to take breaks. So for people who are unable to say have their nicotine fix, they actually have to go out to an area that's a smoking area in order to smoke or vape. So that's a really helpful practice. It's a helpful tool to then help people take breaks and go, wait, how much have I spent today? So thinking about things, taking those breaks is really important. Things like ATM placement. So making sure that the ATM isn't right next to the slot machine, making sure it's a certain distance off the gaming floor, monitoring alcohol use. Another key area, right, is making sure that people are not too intoxicated and they actually get cut off and they have a policy in place that says, look, I'm happy to serve you here, but my policy says I can't. I need to make sure to keep you safe, and I can't deal to you right now. And then underage gambling prevention, ensuring that people are carded, that there's efficient use of carding. And then finally, child and elder neglect and abandonment. So I think a lot of us have heard, unfortunately, stories, tragic stories about young people being left in cars for hours and hours at a time, things like that. So making sure that the monitoring is done around the parking lot, that that people are ensured that they're taken care of to monitor that. Now, some people will, some casinos have said, okay, well, now we're just going to go ahead and start a child care center. Is that effective? Probably not, especially if they're using the same kind of video games that are often very similar to those slot machines on the gambling floor. So the Responsible Gambling Code of Conduct also says, you know, they don't want to have things like celebrity entertainment endorsements, language designed to appeal to minors, you know, talking about personal success, talking about how, you know, placing advertisements near schools, areas where young people would congregate, or online in websites that young people would congregate. Now, this is not because the social casino games are not technically considered gambling. You'll see a lot of pop-ups in mobile games that have to do with social casino games. So again, because they're not considered gambling, they're getting around it. It's a huge loophole. I'm not going to read this, but the National Council on Problem Gambling has a safer sports betting initiative, and the goal is basically to implement policies and practices in place before things get legalized, as well as a lean-to for use when people have legalized sports betting. Only 2/3 of the states so far that have passed sports betting have actually had dedicated RG policies and practices, according to Keith White, who's the executive director of the National Council on Problem Gambling. So that's the context in which things occur. We think about policies, right? Then there's also some practical tools, point of sale tools. So these things are really important for us when we think about pre-committing to a game. So budgeting tools. offering someone the opportunity to set a limit on how much they want to spend on a player's card, for example, and then reminding them, hey, you know that you've reached 50% of what your budget is. Now you reach 75% of what your budget is. And so just sort of popping up, it's a little reminder, it's a little sort of reality check for people who are playing. Taking breaks, these are all effective, and then informed player choice. So showing payback percentages, that's really important because sometimes people just have no idea what a payback percentage is on a slot. It could be 82%, for example, which means every time you pull that machine, you're only 82 cents are essentially coming back out of every dollar overall over a long period of time. So understanding things like that are helpful. What is being kind of the jury's still out on, the research shows, is ID checks are the jury's out on that. Pop-up windows that are like reminding you things like how much you've spent, how much time you've played. Oftentimes people find that annoying and they're just trying to get rid of it. And then time limit setting. So while money limits are seen to be effective in responsible gambling, time limit is not seen as effective in responsible gambling. The jury is still out on that. What is absolutely not effective, the research shows, is that enforced tools. So enforced breaks in play will actually sometimes then cause the opposite effect. So enforced rates where they're saying, okay, now you got to take a break. Someone will actually then oftentimes get angry at that having the break, and then they'll spend more when they return for the break. So these tend to be ineffective. So the more effective tools are those pre-commitment tools, the budgeting tools, and then taking breaks. We always want to encourage break taking. Harm reduction is really important. Now, a lot of people say, well, why would you spend so much time and effort in a casino or really trying to help people who are playing? Why don't we just sort of work on primary prevention? Because people play. People play. People are going to, use alcohol. They're going to use tobacco. And so what do we do to help harm reduction for those who are still wanting to play? It's not all problem gambling. So what Tim Fong from the UCLA has said is the spirit of harm reduction holds a certain appeal for pathological gamblers. Many gamblers are impulsive and hold high expectations for themselves, so that ongoing struggles to achieve total sobriety may be interpreted as yet another failure. So people with gambling problems oftentimes hold such high expectations for themselves, and then the idea of actually quitting and being unable to quit will then be interpreted as a failure. Right? So what can we do to help in terms of bridging that gap and helping them find a way to then say reducing harm with their gambling? Now, this is related in the sense of, for example, this is a perfect harm, or not perfect, it's a great harm reduction tool. NC has Play Smart. So if you go onto the website, you can see a lot of things around knowing the game, busting myths, getting support. Let's just go ahead and go there. Let me pull this over here. So some kind of tongue-in-cheek, very sort of bright kind of messages, positive kind of messages, doing things like using spending calculators. You can choose your game if you want to look at a scratch off, and then you could use a spending calculator, how much you want to spend, how many tickets do you typically buy per visit, how many times you play in a typical week, and then it shows you how much you're actually spending. Kind of cool, pretty practical. And then, giving you other tools and tips for playing safely when you're playing. So that's Play Smart. A lot of people, I kind of look at this like a Game Sense tool, which we're looking at right now. Game Sense is actually a program based out of British Columbia, founded I think in 2010. Amanda Winters knows the answer to this. I forgot already. I think it's about 10 years old now. 2009, actually. Yeah, so it's a harm reduction approach, and it's people-based. So how this is different from typical harm reduction programs, things like the websites and things like that, is that Game Sense is actually people-based. So this is Edgardo Romero. He is a Game Sense advisor in a casino in Massachusetts, and they actually greet people. They're in the casino. They're very friendly. They're not counselors. They don't work for the casino. It's a third party, and what they do is they just hang out. They talk to people. They encourage them to take breaks. They will ask them, hey, what do you know about this and that? They'll talk about myths and odds and facts. They will talk about all sorts of ways to keep it safe during the game, but that building relationship is really important. So they build a relationship, they have the camaraderie, and then if someone does have a problem, they are feeling very approachable for getting some help if they need that help. So Rosemary says, I think rather than a tool that indicates how much one is spending, I guess gamblers may prefer a tool that tracks the winnings. Yeah, good point. Yeah, a lot of people who gamble like to think about how much they have won and not how much they've actually spent. That's a really good point. So that's GameSense. It's people-based. And then if someone wants to exclude for themselves, a GameSense program could help them do that. Now, voluntary self-exclusion is all over. You will find voluntary self-exclusion in casinos. The ability to then say, okay, I can't handle myself. I need to take a break from this casino. So please exclude me. Don't allow me back in. It's a program that will help people not visit brick and mortar casinos. And you would want that to include information about getting help, and then make sure that no marketing and promotion is done after people have signed up for voluntary self-exclusion. So the last thing you want to do is say, sign up for a casino and exclude yourself, and then still keep getting these marketing advertisements. These things are based on a variety of different time periods. So an example would be like a 1-year time period, a 3-year time period, 5-year, or even lifetime periods. A lot of times you'll see online, if you go to say DraftKings or FanDuel or any one of the sports betting operators, you will see ability to then self-exclude. It's pretty important. And it's really relevant right now, especially because of most people being online, is that temptation is so much more difficult. There are software tools like GamBlock and GamBan, and in North Carolina, you actually have GamBan as a free tool if you want to get it. So I'll actually let Amanda Winters or Allison Drade talk about that at the end here. But I did want to leave time, and we had a dedicated 15 minutes to be able to sort of bounce ideas off each other. But I did want to also encourage you to attend a webinar tomorrow, which is by Brianne Dora. She's going to be with you next week on your webinar, but she's also going to be talking tomorrow about payments and responsible gambling solutions. So definitely didn't want to steal her thunder on that. So wanted to kind of leave it more general in terms of the responsible gambling piece. Thank goodness for your amazing program in North Carolina. You have great people in your backyard who are truly public health experts who've been doing this work for a long, long time. And it's like I told Robbie, it's like, why are you inviting me to come? You guys have your experts in your own backyard. So this is great. Check out that site too, morethanGameNC.com. It has a lot of great tools and resources for it as well. And yeah, so Amanda Winters says both the lottery and the casino in North Carolina have voluntary self-exclusion options. Absolutely. Yeah, so if you go to the North Carolina Education Lottery website, you'll see a link up there, and it will show you where to get that. In fact, we can even look at that right now. Let me do that. If I can get back on the one, where's my website? So go ahead and feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to we'd love to have you guys pitch in if you'd like to. If you don't want to do the chat box, you can raise your hand and we can actually have you mic'd up. If you feel like you want to do the audio, that's great. So no longer just a game. So here it is. Here it talks about if you think your play has become a problem, there's hope. So it definitely links to that area for help and then the helpline and chat. If you go there. And so this is on every page in the lottery's website. So it's kind of nice to see that this is something that's embedded throughout their whole website.
Hey, Julie?
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to find, we've got a hand raised, so I'm going to see if I can unmute
Oh,
here.
okay. Yes, and I will answer E. Gator's question, which is, can someone else request an exclusion for a family member? The short answer to that is no. And part of the reason why is because you could say, you know, I want to exclude someone. It's not a voluntary self-exclusion. That would be a forced exclusion. There have been efforts in various jurisdictions to do what's called a third-party exclusion. If someone's being unsafe to themselves or others, and they think it's a particular detriment, that they can do that, but it isn't in practice done. It's a great question.
And I've got I just unmuted, and I'm sorry I don't see the first name, Gator, E. Gator. If you're there, if you have a response or if you have another question.
No.
Okay,
no.
Thank you. And great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, anything else with that? Yeah, and Amanda reminded me about, for some reason I had this on my last one I did with you guys, but I didn't include it in these slides, and that's really important, is a local tool here, is you can actually create this Gamban. I refer to the Gamban, is you can create a Gamban account, and this will, what it does is it blocks gambling software. So if you register with this account, North Carolina Department of Human Services pays for it, and you can actually have that for a year. Okay. Allison says, can you give people an example of local policies that they can change? So in terms of looking at RG policies, Allison, did you want to unmute so we could talk about this? All right, Allison's going to unmute. Can we unmute her, or can she unmute herself because she's part of this panel? Okay, she can't unmute herself, so let me see if I can find you in here. And of course, it's not in alphabetical order, is it? Oh, yes, it is. All right, Allison. Hey.
Hey. So I guess my kind of thought on this is I really want people to understand that there are different things that they can do locally. And I'm RG wise, I'm on the top of my head, I can't think of anything, but like action items that we can do, locally with city council, as opposed to, you have your statewide and then, national. So I'm just kind of from a perspective I'm coming from, and I don't even know if there is, Julie, if there's like any local things that RG wise that we can do as citizens. So we feel like we're really a part of that, policy change at the local level. And I know, I can't think of an example, but I just thought maybe you could.
Yeah, and that's a sticky wicket, right? Because a lot of people are unable to necessarily advocate to their local legislators. We can certainly educate. But to that piece, if there are local card rooms, if there are particularly, if there's a provider that's, in your region that is not really following the RG rules, certainly draw attention to that or try to work with them. But in practicality for a lot of people, that's why I found talking about this RG stuff is like, it seems kind of like at a 30,000 foot level, probably for a lot of people, like, okay, well, what exactly can I do? So I think, locally, it's probably harder, right? Because there aren't a whole lot of local gambling laws. There's mostly statewide, there's mostly a lot of things that are not regulated, for example, the social casino games. So I think in terms of advocacy, really, truly, honestly, I think we need to advocate at oftentimes the federal level for any kind of federal funding for problem gambling services. There is none. I know that seems out of touch. It doesn't seem local, right? We want to keep things local as much as we can. But it's an area that we need. We don't have any federal funding for problem gambling services. There are no, to the point earlier, there are no regulations around things like loot boxes that make it illegal. Loot boxes now have their, the Entertainment Software Rating Board regulates itself. So I think just putting heat onto local legislators and say, hey, did you know this is an issue? And then hopefully bringing it up.
I was also wondering about like sweepstakes too, if there's anything locally people can do. I mean, that's outside of the legal definition of gambling, but obviously we think it's gambling. And maybe that's a deeper discussion for another time, but
yeah. Totally, like sweepstakes. Well, there's also things like high school grad nights where oftentimes they'll have a casino night. So those are opportunities then to have that conversation, is saying, look, we don't necessarily want you to not hold the casino grad night, but if you do hold the casino grad night, let's talk about sort of the problems. Provide your North Carolina problem gambling literature, make sure that the helplines offer. And that really goes for all of those local establishments too, is just ensuring like, hey, are you, did you realize that we have a helpline and we have help here? So providing that local education. I think in terms of the policies though, again, it really goes back to our own education of our own providers. A lot of people don't realize that problem gambling is an issue. A lot of our own folks in our own field in substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder treatment, don't look at the areas of problem gambling. So I realize this is beyond the auspices of RG, of responsible gambling, but screening is really important. Those are things that we can do on local level, ensuring that we're screening for problem gambling. We can use a variety of tools. I can actually provide that in the links, but the National Council of Problem Gambling has, I think you all do too, right? Screening tools in North Carolina. Do you have that on your website? Okay, oh good, I'm seeing Amanda Winters, local bingo halls encourage community gambling events to post a helpline number. Yes, yeah, great minds think alike. Are the places that provide apps to play considering the problem gambling risks their users, such as Google Play Store? Tom Woodward asks. Are the places that provide apps to play considering the problem gambling risks for their users? No, typically they don't, Tom. And I think that's the giant gaping loophole where, in terms of policy, in terms of drawing attention to this issue among legislators who have a lot of other things that they're thinking about, they're not thinking about these things. So drawing attention to it, and even to the area of the Federal Trade Commission, is even the marketing and advertising practices around this and ensuring that there is more safety. The industry largely regulates itself. And so as long as the industry regulates itself, they're going to do whatever they can to make things minimal in terms of their oversight. So a perfect example of that is the loot box issue, where recently they slapped an extra label on loot boxes that says contains random items. And so that contains random items means that now if you look at a game that says that on this label, it means it offers loot boxes. But and that's because of a lot of attention was drawn to it. A lot of people were really irritated by the loot box thing. So instead of having federal oversight, they're like, oh, hey, let's add this label on there. That should appease people. So to go back to the screening piece, there are screening tools on the National Council of Problem Gambling Helpline and the North Carolina Problem Gambling Program Helpline, but these are some brief tools that are really helpful to just check, and if the person answers positively to them, to then recommend further screening. These are practical things that we can do. Again, it's a little bit beyond RG. It's more implemented in the clinical setting, but it is important. Amanda says financial literacy could go a long way in areas where there is no RG avenue, especially when it focuses on the budget piece of staying within your limits. Oh yeah, totally. Financial literacy. So absolutely. Financial literacy is one of those key areas where we can then do our budgets. There's some great tools out there for actually showing your overall household budget and understanding how your money is being spent. And then, so yeah, so when there is no RG avenue. Amanda, do you want to unmute and talk about this anymore? I'm going to unmute you if you want to be unmuted. Hi, Amanda.
Hi. So I think that we don't do a lot of financial literacy, to my knowledge, in North Carolina, pardon me. But when we're looking at local, or speaking about local efforts that we could engage in, I think that talking about setting a budget and setting limits, similar to how GameSense does, is a great way to introduce the topic, especially when people aren't super open to discussing maybe problem gambling or responsible gambling. You can hide it under the guise of financial literacy and budgeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of sneaking it in, right? It's sneaking it in, it's sneaking gambling, and this goes in probably more into like primary prevention, things like that. But yeah, sneaking gambling into even school settings, where even if it's math or some kind of financial literacy, then talking about gambling is being included in there. Oftentimes we find ourselves sneaking our work into other areas because people definitely don't want to hear about problem gambling by itself. It scares people off. Allison says we have one grant application at Appalachian University that focuses on financial literacy. That is through our grant program. Awesome. That's great. So yeah, so North Carolina has a bunch of great grants. You guys obviously can speak much more to it. The work that you're doing with primary prevention with Stack Deck is a great example, and how you've implemented it even online. Any other questions, thoughts, any other hands raised? Let's see, I think I've seen one more. As an NFCC credit counselor, we do work with gambling issues in our sessions. Thank you, Vera. That's great. All right. I see that we're coming up upon the hour. Are there any last questions or your own comments that you have? Again, you have experts in your own backyard in Amanda and Allison. So if either one of you want to have a last comment, I'd love to have you guys hype up.
I think that anybody who has any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. This is Amanda Winters. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, also please reach out to me. We'd love to get you guys engaged and have you spreading the good word of RG and problem gambling prevention throughout the state.
Thanks, Amanda, for your work. Amanda has a lot of experience, and she worked with the Game Sense program in Massachusetts, so she's very well versed in RG. All right. Well, again, the hesitancy here with talking about RG, especially with a lot of clinical providers, is how to make this practical, how to make it applicable. I do hope that you've come out of this with a little more understanding of really why RG is more important than ever, especially with the pandemic, and then a couple of things that can be done, even if you're feeling like you can advocate even on a broader scale, and then some implementations that are effective. So again, thank you so much for spending your Monday afternoon with us, and really appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, for another great presentation and all your expertise. So remember next week, guys, June 22nd, problem gambling legislation with Brianne Dora will be our guest speaker. And thank you for making that announcement too, Julie, regarding, go to the, as far as getting where to find these slides, just go to the NC Behavioral Health, UNC Behavioral Health Springboard website, where you go to the course page and you're going to be able to access your certificate. That's where you'll find these slides. Also remember that we do record all these, so you'll be able to get that great helpful information that Julie Hynes has presented this afternoon there. And then you're going to be notified also, as far as I believe with the evaluation process, Jamesia wanted us to let you know. So again, thank you for another great presentation, Julie, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.